Hey, Sterile Processing Universe, it's Hank Balch here from Beyond Clean. You are watching and listening to another episode of Fighting Dirty. And boy, have we got a great show for you this Friday evening of CS Week. By the way, congrats. It ain't over yet. We got until midnight tonight or midnight tomorrow until CS Week officially ends. So hopefully you'll let us extend the party a little bit longer and have a conversation about trying to add people to our CS world, right? Because we want every CS week to be a little bigger than last CS week. And in order to do that, we need new employees coming in to join our team. We talked a couple of weeks ago to Jim Carlock, and talked about the looming sterile processing crisis. Well, tonight we're going to talk to folks who are involved on the front lines in different ways on educating the future of the sterile processing industry. So as we get going tonight, what I want to ask of the audience here, wherever you're watching us from, please shoot a comment in the comment section below. Tell us where it is. If you're watching from the U.S., can you give us your state? And if you're watching or listening to us from overseas, tell us what country you're tuning in from. Throughout the show today, we're going to have a couple of audience polls that we'll throw out to try to get some of your feedback and insight on the topics that we'll be discussing. At the end of the show, we'll try to give some contact information in the comment section for everybody who's on the panel today, so that if you do want to follow up in regards to school or hospital training, you can have a contact of our panel and do so at that time. All right, so without further ado, let's see who we are going to be talking to tonight. So I'm going to welcome first Julie Hamrick to the panel tonight. Julie, can you say hi to everyone?
Hello, everyone.
Hey, could you introduce yourself and tell folks where you're at and what you do?
Sure. My name is Julie Hamrick, obviously. I'm the founder and CEO of Silicon Valley Surgitech Institute, SVSTI, here in Milpitas. We just relocated from San Jose, California to Milpitas. We have sterile processing and surgical technology programs.
Sweet. And we're going to be talking a lot about those. So let's find out who else is joining us tonight. Marjorie Wall, welcome to the show.
Hi.
And if you would, Marjorie, tell us where you're joining us from and what it is that you do.
Absolutely. So I am Director of Sterile Processing at a large hospital in Los Angeles. I'm also on the Board of Directors. So I run operations, web improvement, and I love, hiring and investing in new people.
Awesome. Yeah, well, we're super excited, again, to have insight from all the perspectives in this question about training, externships, etc. And I think the best place to start is, what does this process typically look like when we're talking about training in a school and externships? And so I guess kind of let's start with you, Julie. Like, what is that process when people hear the word training or externship in the sterile processing context? What are they talking about? What do they mean?
So basically with our sterile processing program, they do on campus, it's a hybrid program. They complete the online courses, their classwork, and come to campus, do the hands-on. Then when we say that we're sending them out for externship, what that means is that we're sending them to a medical facility that accepts them for educational purposes. So externship is learning opportunities provided by educational institutions and medical facilities, which is also employers, to give students a practical experience in their field of study. So that's what an externship is. And some people might hear the word internship, which that usually typically means that you're trained in-house.
Yeah, so that was my question actually, and I asked you before we got started, just so you could clarify to me, like, what is the difference? Because we hear those words, and I think, sometimes we hear them interchangeably, but there is an important distinction. So internship is happening in a facility internal training program type, and an externship is what happens when you bring folks in from the outside into your facility. Is that a good way to define that?
Yeah, basically, yeah.
Okay. So Marjorie, can you speak to, on the user side, so from the hospital setting, in the training process or the externship process, what does that look like from the perspective of a manager and director?
Sure. So externs, we love them. It's a chance to have these new students that have gone through a training program in a college or school come into our departments and then work side by side with preceptors to learn the on-the-job part. For any SPD that's going to be successful, you have to understand, the textbook work as well as the actual real physical work that we do in the department. So it's always a great opportunity to take people that have that training and education in school and to bring them into departments to give them that real world experience and really set them up for success when they get hired into permanent positions.
And without that, right, without hospitals, the training programs would not exist, and vice versa. We don't have training programs that are feeding our hospitals with new staff, especially to the point that I made about the previous conversation that I had with Jim Karloff with the looming staffing crisis. These two things should be symbiotic, right, working together. And on that topic, I put it in the feed on a couple of these channels beforehand, a link to an article that Julie and I actually co-authored potentially a year ago or so now, but talking about this dual perspective on why collaboration is so important when it comes to training the future of our industry. Kind of wanted, Marjorie, if I can go back to you here on this next question about the typical on-the-job training process. If you were to hire someone directly off the street, which there's a lot of hospitals in the U.S. that do not do that. They will not hire anyone without some kind of either existing certification or experience. So I know like this may not be an option in your particular hospital if you're listening or watching to this, but there are still hospitals today that hire folks off the street and do on-the-job training from beginning to end. So what would that process look like if your facility does that?
Sure. So it's really an interesting question. When I started in the field, I was hired out of dietary and went into the processing world and was trained through on-the-job training. I actually didn't even get certification until several years later. So it's something that I do believe in to an extent, but I don't want to undercut the need for certification or the need for education because that's critical as well. But with on-the-job training, it's really a good opportunity to develop someone. Every hospital market does not have, trained, certified techs ready to get hired. So sometimes you need to take a risk with someone, whether it's a transfer from another department like EVS, materials management, dietary, and train them. They're already loyal to the organization, and you can invest that knowledge into them to let them grow it. Or whether it's off the street that interviewed really well, has a great background, and this is going to be a really good opportunity for them. So I've done that in the past when I've hired people without experience. I put them through a very rigorous training program. Typically, it can be up to 6 months with preceptors. Preceptors aren't the entire time, but they'll do like 1, 2, 3 weeks in decontam with a preceptor, and then 1 or 2 weeks solo, and then the same thing with assembly, sterilization, case picking, and then usually finishing out in the runner position. But really taking it and training them one-to-one correctly and thoroughly with the preceptor, and then giving them the ability to be successful on their own, and also providing them with textbooks for their CBSPD, so that they can study and become certified. So, but it's really a good thing to be able to invest in your people.
Yeah, so there's a lot packed into that, right? So you talked about the time it takes. Mm-hmm. You talked about the dedicated preceptors, which there's a lot of hospitals and there's a lot of folks, probably listening to this think, and a dedicated preceptor, number one, what is a preceptor? And number two, does a dedicated preceptor actually exist out there for 6 months? And the real life challenges is, many times it doesn't, unless you're intentionally building that on the job training program, expecting that to happen, right? And you're working with your administrators to say, hey, if you want to do this, if you want to be able to hire off the street like you're trying to have us do, these are the resources that we need to make it successful. And far too many times, we're not given those resources, even if we're being asked to do those things, right? Kind of want to throw it to Julie now and ask, this is another conversation we were having actually before we went live, that balance between hospitals and hiring managers that want someone with experience, but they also want people who are still fairly new to the industry. On the other side, like these new graduates want to get jobs, and they've gone through training programs many times, but then hospitals on the flip side will say, yeah, but we want someone with more experience than what you have. So, like, is there a middle ground there? Where's where's the misunderstanding happening between the training program, the hospital, and the student?
Well, so I think it all basically starts with exactly what you were just talking about as far as preceptors. So when a hospital doesn't have enough people that want to support student education, that's where the issue starts. So if employees are complaining that they have to train, they're not getting compensated, the students are slowing their daily routine down, it becomes a nuisance to have a student. But there's always two sides to a coin. So if you want a potential long-term employee and you want them trained the way that under your policies and procedures, that's the best opportunity, is to take a student in as an externship clinical placement, so that it's basically like a free job interview. So if that student has good work ethic, is a good team player, that it's worth investing in as a long-term employee. The problem lies when hospitals don't want to take on students because A, they don't want to do the paperwork to sign a contract. B, they're scared of taking a student because of a past student that maybe messed up somehow. There's many factors that come into play for that. But they have to take a chance, because I have a lot of places calling me for my graduates, but they want them to have some experience. So why don't you take them as students then? And then you can train them the way that you want them trained. And that's the difference with, as I was telling you before, with my program versus some of the other ones here locally, is they do a lot of book study, reading the book to the students so that they can pass their certification test. They don't look at the bigger picture, which is, I want my students to know, and they know, because we have sterile processing as a prereq for surg tech. I want all my surg techs to understand sterile processing side. So I make them complete that, or they have to be certified with current work experience in order to join the surg tech. There's reasons for that. First of all, we all know each department blames the other. They don't work as a team. So that was my goal with having that, is the teamwork. So when they take the course to get into the surg tech program, they're learning which all my sterile processing students learn the classification of the instruments. What is that instrument used for? Because I want them to be able to look at that board and say, oh, we're doing orthopedic case. That nurse comes in and asks you for scissors. Which scissors are you going to give them? Not have to be told exactly which scissors. Use your brain, think outside the box. Mm-hmm. So I pushed them a little bit further than, I guess SPD typical program would for doctors. And that's because of the prereq for surge tech and because I want my students to stand out when they go out to the hospital. They already know how to wrap, they know how to assemble. So it's...
Yeah, no, that's great insight on the bigger picture. And I think, that can be an encouragement for the folks out there that are trying to do this internal, to keep in mind, you've got to think outside of just your department. You got to think on that customer service standpoint, right? On a critical thinking aspect of how are these careers connected, not just if you become a sterile processing tech, then you can become a surgical tech at some point, like there's a ladder there, but they're connected in other ways to that deeper understanding of the procedures and complexities. And even in the early chapters to a lot of these textbooks, you get introduced to all these procedure names and you're thinking as a new tech, like, well, why do I have to know the name of all these procedures? Like, what does that have to do with cleaning, packaging, anything else? But it does, to your point. If you spend a couple of days in an department, you find out real quick how those procedures are connected with what you're supposed to be doing and how best to serve the customer in the operating room. I just want to take a moment here to ask an audience poll for some folks. I'm curious on this topic of hiring graduates. Does your facility now, does it hire new graduates with no experience? You can interpret no experience however you like if that's with externship but no work experience, like paid work experience or separate work experience, or more than 6 months work experience, however you want to define that. But I'm curious to know, what are folks out there in your particular state or country, what are you seeing and what is your department requiring for hiring these new graduates? So please put your answer in the comment section below. And again, if you're tuning in new here, let us know where you're from so we can kind of put the answers with the states and the countries as well. Because we get some of those answers in, I did want to go to a question we were kind of touching on, Marjorie, a little bit, but the question on why hospitals don't hire new technicians or new graduates. Like, why don't more of these hospitals out there do it? And I know Julie said, sometimes there can be some hesitancy on the externship side of things on, well, these students are going to get in our way, they're going to slow the process down. But outside of that, which I don't buy that as an excuse, by the way, we can talk about that here in a minute, but outside of that, what are some other reasons that you've seen in the industry for hospitals to just say, hey, we're not going to do that, we're not going to hire newbies?
Yeah, so to start with, I say hire the newbies, and I'm not saying only hire newbies, pick the best applicant for your position that's open, but don't overload new grads. A lot of them make excellent hires. You have to take a chance on people. There's a shortage of techs in the market, and it's good to hire the best in your people and build engagement and get people that stay long term in your organization so that you quit having the turnover. You're not constantly replacing people over and over again, and you get the right to stay and they're welcome. So with that said, a lot of the reasons why I hear that people don't want to hire new grads is because of lack of experience. They don't have preceptors. They don't have enough staff as it is. Half their staff is registry. So people are focused more on dealing with the day-to-day emergency than building a workforce that's going to be sustainable and be able to maintain it in the long run. So hospitals right now are focusing on crisis mode, getting everybody they can get in to get in. And, in many cases, they can get them in cost-wise. But they're doing it, by doing that, they're hurting themselves in the long run. Yeah.
Yeah. So Julie, would you have anything different to add, like from the educator's perspective, like some pushback or maybe some comments that you hear from hospitals that, or maybe even from your students, you know, like what they've been told when they've been denied a job offer?
Well, it's, you know, here's what I tell my students. If you go, the market is flooded with schools. If you go above and beyond, and you have to stand out. So you have to be a team player. You have to show up on time. You have to stay off your cell phone. You have to stay out of the break room. You have to do all those things that are required for a good work ethic to make yourself noticeable. Because I always explain to them that it's really hard to get hired on as a new grad if you don't get hired on at your externship. However, I've had plenty of students who have gotten good referrals because their hospital that they were placed at for extern just wasn't hiring. They didn't have any open positions, but they got a referral from somebody there. But I think that the hospitals don't want to hire new grads because they do want, I can't say all hospitals don't. I have some places that like new grads only because they don't want the bad habits. They want somebody to come in fresh that they can train the way that they want, according to their procedures and policies. But I think that the ones that don't hire new grads are just don't want to invest, I guess, the time, the energy, or maybe, you know, a lot of times we go by past experiences. So one thing could happen in their past, even if it was 10, 15 years ago as a director or manager, and they're going to remember that, you know, and so people tend to not want to give second chances for anything as an idea, you know. But I also have hospitals calling me right now during COVID and surgery centers that they need techs. So, and that's why I say, well, why don't you take a student? Well, we don't want a student. We want somebody, a new grad, but somebody with a little bit of experience. So, but the hospitals have to realize that if a student is a new grad and they're a good new grad, they've already got a job, right? Like they probably got hired at their externship. So so they're not going to leave that job that they got hired on as. So the ones that with the experience have already gotten jobs, is what I'm saying, you know? So you have to hire if you want a new grad, they're not going to have experience, basically, is what I'm saying. Did you freeze, Hank?
I think you might have. It's okay. I have to, I mean, people need to take a chance on new grads.
Yeah, definitely. That's how we're going to make our field stronger, better. You know, you have to be team players.
Yeah, and you know, people need a chance. They need that first opportunity. You know, I got it when I started. I'm sure you got your first opportunity as well. And it is, you know, understanding the business case and the investment that needs to happen. But in the long run, it's the best thing to reduce the turnover.
Definitely.
Yeah, I'd rather than to keep having to hire new people.
Exactly. Agreed. Absolutely.
Your program sounds amazing.
Thank you.
We have to talk about graduates.
I know. I actually, you know, it's funny that you mentioned that because I do have a couple contracts in Oregon, and I was looking, and because I've had students that wanted to relocate to California, so
yeah,
you never know.
That's right. I know there's a lot of people that want to relocate for jobs, and there's a lot of recruiting for people from far away because of talent. So we're going to have to do something in the industry, and not for California, but to make sure that those positions get filled with qualified people.
Definitely.
Yeah. What else do you see as from the instructor side? I'm curious because I'm usually more on the operational side.
So what was the question?
With new graduates, what have been some of your experience? Like, is it Like I know with surgical techs, they get hired right off the bat, or it can take a few years. Is it kind of the same for SPD techs?
So the surgical techs are easier to get hired on because they're at the hospital a lot longer. You know, they're there 4 months versus my extern students spend 6 weeks at externship. And I think the fact that they're already building relationships with the surgeons, so it's easier to hire the surge tech that's already established there, that has that relationship with the surgeons. Sterile processing is.
Sorry.
Hank's back. So it's definitely more challenging, I think, for sterile processing. But like I said, if a student goes above and beyond, especially right now where there's a high demand, it's, you know, they'll get placed.
Welcome back, Hank.
Can't hear you.
I'm sorry, what were you going to say?
Oh, no. I think Hank was trying to talk. I was letting him know we can't hear him.
Yeah, we can't hear you yet. You look like you're in.
Yeah, go ahead.
So do you have a lot of getting new externships started?
Do I have a lot of new externships?
Yeah, how does that work, getting hospitals to agree to bring on students?
So basically I'm a one and all type of person. So I am the clinical coordinator as well. So I have relationships with a lot of people in the community, which has really helped. But for new contracts, I just have to, and a lot of times it takes repetitively emailing and calling. But what I've found is if you take them treats and introduce you in person, it tends to be somewhat easier than trying to touch base with somebody that you've never talked to before on via email.
That makes sense.
Yeah. But you know, it's been challenging this year because of the COVID. You know, a lot of places said, no, we're not going to take any students until 2021, or places that have taken 6 students will now only take 2, those type of scenarios. Before COVID, my students never waited more than a week to be placed after they were done with the on-campus portion. But the last 2 classes, there's been a couple people who have had to wait a few weeks. Months.
I've heard horror stories of students that go to these programs and then they're waiting a long time for their externship because of resistance. So it sounds like it's a great program.
Well, and I've had several students come to me from other programs, and they waited for over a year for their externship site. You know, and you forget the didactic part of that, what you learned, the hands-on portion, if they learn the hands-on portion at that school. So I've taken on a couple of students that had already completed a class at another school. They did never get set up for externship. They completed my program and got sent out to externship. We're extremely happy and grateful. So,
yeah. That was the other thing I saw when I was working with the school a few years ago. There were always students that would take the exam right off the bat after graduation, and those that would wait. And I always wondered why they would do that. But
well, you know, it's interesting because the same schools that I've been speaking of require their students to take the exam before they place them for externship.
wow.
I think there's a couple different reasons for that. I think one, they might not have enough sites. They put them on a waiting list. They have to pass their certification. But the way I look at it is you're not helping that student be successful because you're going to learn 70% of what you need at that hospital. at your externship site. So even though we have to, and I'm sure you know this too, but sometimes we tend to see a difference in what's in the book versus what we actually do in the field. So I try to bring that to their attention and say, okay, so this is the standard, this is what's in book, but you're also, when in Rome, you do what the Romans do. So whatever your hospital policy is, that's what you're going to follow. And there is some differences sometimes, so they have to be flexible.
Yeah, and that totally makes sense. And I don't know if there's like a solution that's cookie cutter for everybody, but I do know we've got to figure out how to invest in new people. Hey, you're back.
Hey, I can hear you and I can see you. What I missed?
I don't know. A lot.
A lot. Yes.
All right. Well, let me try to get us caught back up here. And so what happens if you don't plug your laptop in and you start a live feed is your battery goes all the way down to where it just turns off. So now you know.
Remember that.
So we talked a little bit about some of the challenges out there for new students and new techs in terms of finding a job, but I want to really zero in on once they get the job and once they're in the facility or maybe once they're starting their externship, what are those challenges that they encounter in the department that they may not have expected through their training program, or again, if they're hired off the street, that they may have just not been prepared for. And Julie, I'll throw this first to you.
So what they might not be prepared for?
Yeah, just some challenges that new students may encounter. So maybe it's not an issue of preparation, but maybe just something that they're surprised about.
To be honest with you, I think the biggest challenge is a student that is just doing the program just to get into it to make money. When they're not hungry and they're not humble, it tends to not work out as successfully as they might have hoped. Students need to also bring something to the table, and that's good teamwork. That's showing up early, staying later than, not, 3 o'clock, gotta go. Those type of things is what's gonna help them succeed, especially being new.
That's something before my computer cut out, actually, like you reminded me, you were talking about the students that go above and beyond are the ones that really open up those opportunities. And I wanted to say there, this goes into the power of a network, and not only trusting that you've got good education and that you know the job, but building that network, if it's through social media, if it's through in-person network. And this goes back, to choosing your school, right? So if your school has a good network of potential hospitals out there for you to get hired, that is a tremendous amount of value.
You mean like SVSTI?
Right. Well, yeah, that or wherever you are in the United States or abroad, right? Like those are the kinds of things you should be asking of a school that you're looking for is, what is your network? Who has hired from your school into these hospitals? And then in addition to that, something that I'm real passionate about is getting active on social media. Like you can start your online sterile processing presence before the first day you ever set foot in a hospital. And in fact, you should start making connections. Day one, you start your training program or your school, get on the Facebook groups, get on LinkedIn, start following Beyond Clean, wherever you can find us, start soaking up that information and getting connected with that network. It is so, so, so valuable.
Definitely.
I want to throw this to you, Marjorie, too, just on some of the challenges question. Like, what are some of the things you see for new students or new technicians coming into the hospital setting?
Sure. So I absolutely want to answer that, but I want to echo what you said, if it's okay. A lot of the path being hired is who you know, and it's not just you have to know the boss or whatever, but typically when your name comes across a hiring manager, if they know someone that knows you, they're going to reach out to that person, and if someone vouches for you, that's going to go a long way in getting you hired. So starting that network, whether it's social media or getting to know your classmates where they get hired, or going to a school that's got a lot of connections that they can connect you with. Every one of those connections is more exposure that's going to lead to a job or can lead to a job. I just wanted to clarify that because I agree with that too.
That's great. Yeah, good point.
Yeah. So with that said, so challenges for new students and new techs. A big piece of it, I'd say there's probably two things that I see that really are harder for new people. One is cultural challenges, and the other is the pressure of the job. So a lot of the new grads come in very technically savvy. They know how to run a sterilization load. Many of them know their instruments, or they can learn them quickly, especially now that a lot of hospitals have instrument tracking systems that make that a little bit easier, right? But you're not always prepared for the pressure from the OR that this train needs to be turned around now, that you have to get this through decon, but you can't skip any steps to do it right. Learning how to manage that pressure of the sterile processing job. I mean, we really are, we make miracles happen every day without breaking rules and doing anything wrong. So being able to manage that, and then also being able to manage the culture. Sterile processing, especially ones where there's long-term crews, it's very culturalized, and it can take a little bit of time for the long-term people to give the new people a chance to acclimate. So really developing people skills so that when you come into the new department, you don't come in to change everything right off the bat or show that you know everything, and give it a chance, get to know the people, get to know the culture, and then be part of the change that you need to be, or be the SPD tech leader you need to be, or whatever that is. But get to know the environment and culture first.
Absolutely. Oh, sorry.
Okay, go ahead. No, yeah, jump in there because I was going to turn it to you.
No, I think that's great what she said. I absolutely agree. And that's what I mean by humble, right? So I always tell a student, never say I know. Even if you know, do not say I know. Say thank you, because you don't know. Otherwise, you wouldn't be at the school, or you wouldn't be on externship. You wouldn't be a new grad, a new employee. It's just really important. I think it rubs people the wrong way when you go in either trying to tell staff members what to do, like, oh, that's not what the book says, why are you doing it that way? Or, oh, I know how to do this, because you rub people the wrong way. And like she said, you want to come in gracefully and get to know who's there, your environment, everybody's personalities. There's a lot of different personalities in the medical field, as we all know. So you have to be humble. You have to remain humble.
Yeah. No, I mean that, I've got 3 secrets to career growth, and humility is number 1. We won't go into the other 2 on this panel, but that's why, because no one wants to work with a know-it-all. Even if they are, they don't want to feel like they're the one that don't know what's going on, especially to Marjorie's point, if it's the experienced staff, if they feel attacked, or if they feel like, who is this new person coming in, and perhaps they do know, perhaps they don't know. And if you make like one false move as a new person, well, then it's kind of held against you sometimes. And so, yeah, like your point, Julie, it's much safer to be in that position of a sponge and just soaking it all up, learning, watching, listening more than you're talking. And then from there, build on that experience. And I do want to give a challenge to any managers or directors out there, though, to Marjorie's point about culture. It is incumbent upon department leaders to create a culture that is welcoming to new employees. It is not okay to have a culture like, we hear this from the operating room I think the phrase is nurses eat their young. Well, the same can be true in sterile processing, and it is, at the end of the day, it's the manager's responsibility to make that department a welcoming space for new employees. Otherwise, your team will just continue to get smaller and smaller if you can never bring new people in, or that turn and turnover will happen again and again and again. And as irritated or frustrated as some of the old timers may get, they're even more irritated and frustrated when they're in decontam. It's a busy day and there's no one else to help because they've run off all the new people that we tried to hire. So there's a balance there, and I want to put that firmly on the shoulders of leaders. I know individuals, we can choose how we act and how we talk, but leaders put up with things, what they allow. Like that becomes what happens, and so we can't let that happen in our departments if we want to continue building.
Yeah. Hank, I have to say I agree with that, and I'm glad you said it. I'll be real quick. But the other thing I just want to emphasize or clarify, we also want to make sure that we're keeping a speak up culture. So if the new person comes in and we don't want them to, we want them to be humble, we want them to learn, and we want them to acclimate. But we also don't want them to not speak up if they see a patient safety concern. So it's finding that balance, and you're right, it falls to leadership to create that culture where new people are welcomed and they have a voice to speak up safely and appropriately. So sorry, I just.
Oh, that's great. You know what I'm going to say is humility works both ways.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just, we're not just asking new staff and students to come in and be humble. We should be also asking our existing staff to be humble and be willing to learn something from the book and from a new student, who just went through this training process in a very thorough manner that, some of our existing staff, they haven't read the certification book in 20 years. So yeah, like it can be good to be reminded of certain things that these new folks just learned yesterday and they're excited about it and want to tell you about it. Don't be always taking offense and feel like you're the victim in that scenario. So yeah, like that's a great point, and I just want to add that in there too. It does cut both ways, and it is a responsibility again of the staff and leadership. And then to Julie's point, these instructors in these schools, to be communicating to these new students the cultural impact of their attitudes, coming into their externships, and the impact that can have on the rest of the staff. So, all these are great points. So thank you for bringing those up. We have answered this a little bit, this next question, but I'm going to actually throw this out as an audience poll. See if I can get this up here. So what makes a good sterile processing training program or school? So this can be from your perspective. If you've gone through a training program in school, please let us know, like, what were the things that you really loved about it? Like, what made it good? Put that in the comment section below. Or if you've done in-facility training, if you're a preceptor, if you're an educator, like what defines a good program from your perspective? What is something that's critical to have if you want to call this program complete and consistent, for what you're trying to churn out for these new employees, if they're new graduates or just new employees in general? So I'd love to see your thoughts below as we continue on this panel. So we've covered a lot on the reasons for collaborating. I think we've kind of gone in depth to that, but I want to talk about the how, because I think if folks are listening and they're on the fence before on the value of this collaboration impact, I think maybe we pushed them across the fence. So now folks have fallen to the other side and they're like, okay, guys, like y'all convinced me, I need to collaborate. This is important. But still the question is, how? Like, what does this practically look like? What does a good relationship look like between a school, and a hospital, and a hiring manager? So Julie, let's start with you. If you can kind of speak to that. If you were to build a relationship from the ground up and build that collaboration, how would you start and what would that look like?
Well, and I was talking a little bit about that when you were off, but it tends to be easier when you have no connection to a new facility to just go in person. Everybody in the OR and SPD love food, so you take them treats and tend to want to talk to you. I think the important thing is, at least on the education side, I don't know, she could speak to the manager at the facility as far as for the facility side, but on the education side, there's not a lot of schools so they reach out to facilities and, can you take my student? They say yes. Then we process the paperwork, they send the student, and that's the end of the relationship. I think it's very important to show your appreciation and your gratitude and your gratefulness and all of that when you're not even placing a student there. So just go up and drop off some treats or donate to GoFundMe for Sterile Processing Week, to their facility. Do the little things that show that you have a relationship. You're not just using them to place a student. I think it's important for the facility to feel appreciated and to feel that you actually care about that student. Like, my facilities know that if they reach out to me and say, this student is out of control, showing up late, doing whatever, I will pull that student. If a site kicks that student out of their site, they are kicked out of the program, because my facility sites are my number one. You have to have that relationship, and you have to have that respect from them for them in order them to trust you with placing your extern students.
What do you say, Marjorie? Do you have anything to add from a facility perspective on how this collaboration looks from the inside?
Yeah, I think one of the things that works really well when you're doing this type of collaboration is to have, an upfront conversation before the student's placed there about what the plan is. So how many days in decon, what type of instrument should they be doing those days that they're there? How many days in assembly are they going to get to use the installation tester to test out some instruments? Are they going to be able to use the boroscope? To really have a plan of what you're expecting those interns to get to handle and touch and do during the time that they're in the facility. I've seen it before where the externship starts, and then the manager gets this person, and then they just kind of put them in the area where it's the easiest and they have to do the least amount of work, so they just end up cleaning equipment for 2 weeks, which really doesn't help the student out at all. So just really good partnership up front on what the plan is, and then, an active partnership to make sure that both sides, the hospital as well as the school, is doing what they would do to make sure those students' externship is a positive experience.
Absolutely. I think it's important to, after establishing the standards and the requirements from both parties, I think it's also very important that we have weekly evals for our students, so that we're getting continuous feedback on what the student needs to work on. So it helps on, with future students being placed there, what they're looking for, what their expectation is, all of those things. Having these relationships with the facilities, I tend to know, most of the time I place the student according to several factors, and that's the location of where the student is, their availability for hours, their personality and skill level. I think it's very important to try to place a student that is going to be successful at a certain particular facility. And so a lot of times you have to match the right student skill-wise, personality-wise, where they live. If they live 2 hours away, they're probably not going to want to get a job there. So all of those factor in too.
Yeah, I guess I think you alluded to this, Marjorie, but I know from personal experience the importance ahead of time of determining what are we going to do if the students come in on a very busy day, because we have busy days, and it's not fair, to students especially to come in and change or try to short circuit their training experience just because they happen to be busy, because there are seasons in the life of sterile processing department. They can be busy for weeks and weeks and weeks. And so there is no not busy day where they can get the full training experience. So you really have to commit to that up front and say, we are committing to you as a host facility that we will prioritize and have staffing available to give you that full training experience, that full externship experience in particular. So that was a great point about the cleaning of equipment, because you're right. That's a temptation for kind of stressed out managers and staff is, okay, like just go get them doing something, get them out of the way so I can focus on what's going on. But that's not good for them. It's not good for us. It's not good for the school. Like, it's not good for anybody except for trying to put out fires every day. And again, like, we can't run departments or training programs like that. So, in the short time that we have left here, I do want to give folks kind of a takeaway for ensuring that students get successful externships. So we talked about networking. We talked about going above and beyond. Is there anything else that we haven't covered that you have seen to be successful in your experience as an educator, Julie, or in your experience as a hiring manager, Marjorie, that we can give folks tuning in to say, hey, this is what you need to be considering if you were considering already. These are things that you need to be doing if you haven't been doing them already to make sure that you get that job and that your externship is successful by the time you get done. Marjorie, if you want to start us off.
Sure. So a couple of things you said. There are things we've said before, but I'm not going to repeat. A couple of things that we haven't said yet, though, is during your externship, make sure that you're speaking up, you're building a relationship with that manager, and you're giving them real-time feedback. So if your preceptor isn't really supporting you or you're not getting what you need, I'm not saying be a complainer, but I am saying don't be afraid to speak up for yourself to make sure that you're getting the experience that you need to get to be successful in a job. The other thing that I would really recommend towards that path of getting hired, a lot of people come into sterile processing expecting to get a Monday through Friday job on day shift, right? So just have realistic expectations. The busiest shift is evening shift from 3 p.m. until 11, and this is pretty universal unless you're in a surgery center. And to get hired, you would have to take an on-call job, a part-time job, a graveyard job, an evening shift job, and build seniority, build experience in the facility you're in. And then, when those day shift positions open, you get to apply for them. So really target the hospital you want to work at, and then take the job you need to take to get hired there. And then, keep building relationships, keep learning, keep working hard, and then eventually you're going to get that day shift shot.
That's huge. That's a great insight there. And I amen everything you said. Julie, from your perspective, what do you want to add?
Well, I absolutely agree with that. And I also think if there's any potential students or new grads listening, you need to make sure that you don't turn down a job just because it's not the perfect job, right? Like, students tend to be very picky sometimes about, well, I want this facility, I want, these hours, and I can only do these days. Well, as Jay said, you have to start somewhere. So you have to be open to being flexible and taking whatever you can to get your foot in that door to start building those relationships.
Yeah, no, that's a huge part of that. And I'll say, from personal experience as a guy who started on second shift, it's funny, on the conversations around like generational gaps in sterile processing and everything else, you tend to see, at least in my experience, you see a lot of younger folks on the second and third shift. Like third shift, sometimes, they're a little older sometimes, but second shift, this tends to be where all the young folks go because, to your point, Marjorie, if you stay there, everybody wants to slide down to day shift eventually. Like that's the job that a lot of folks want. Some folks were made for third shift, some folks were made for second. I feel like I was created to work second shift, but that taking the jobs that are offered, Julie, is huge because things can happen quick. Like you can be hired for third shift. Next week, a second shift job can open. Well, you're not going to get that job necessarily if you wait around and try to reapply. If you get in the system, you get hired, like you could even get your shift before you even start your first day of work, potentially, right? Like no promises here, but that's how things change in sterile processing. So yeah, like, get your foot in the door, get that name badge, get into the system, and then the whole opportunity opens to you, and you get to hear, I think they call it the hidden job market. You hear about jobs before they're posted. So before anybody else out there gets the opportunity to put their name in the hat, internal, we know what's going on, and you can make those shift changes in a way that you would just never get to do if you're just watching the web page from outside. So yeah, those are great points. I want to close this here, and I want to thank y'all both for being the most awesome guests in the world on a live feed, because not only did your host drop off, but I dropped off and I tried to come back in and I dropped off for who knows how long I was gone, but I'll come back in. I'm like, hey, they're still talking. Still following the discussion outline. It was beautiful. So y'all are freaking all stars and heroes in my book. And I just want to thank you for being so committed again to the conversation to come on, number one, but to keep that conversation going without your host. So yeah, appreciate it again. I would love to have y'all back at some point to talk about another related topic, because we just scratched the surface for training and schooling and externship and leadership, humility, the whole shebang. So in the comment section below, I'll put some contact information for everybody if folks want to reach out. Marjorie has done an interview on the podcast with us before, so y'all can check out her previous interview with us. Then, as I said at the beginning of the live feed, Julie has done an article with me about a year ago talking about collaborating with hospitals and training programs and the critical need for that. So we'll put a link to that as well. All right, so with that, I want to thank our panelists again for coming on the show, and I want to thank all of y'all for tuning in late on CS Week to learn about externships, training, hospital, career growth. I hope you got something out of this, and I hope when you come back into work on Monday morning, you're encouraged to have some humility, to be welcoming and opening to new hires and new students, and to be thinking about the future of our industry, because without schooling and training programs, it's not a good future. We've got to have these relationships built up. We've got to have new faces coming in with new passion and drive. So hopefully you're encouraged, but I hope Monday morning you come in, with that new sense of, we're going to make this happen. We're going to collaborate. And as always, we say, keep fighting dirty, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.